Okay. All right. So, I'm really happy to speak with you about the research that is taking place not just at Mass General, but really across the Mass General Brigham system. And what I kind of chose to do today I'm going to be showing you a lot of photos and pictures to try to give you a sense of a few things. One, why it's important, why it's so important right now to be participating in research studies, and two, what it's actually like. So, I'm starting off with this slide, which this is perhaps one of the most significant scientific advances that we have just had. This is the approval of lecanemab or Leqembi. The FDA gave accelerated approval to this on January 6th. It's causing a tremendous amount of excitement because it's the first new therapeutic that looks like it actually helps people's symptoms that we've had in 20-something years. And I want to kind of make a little, make that a little conditional. I'm saying it's one of the greatest scientific advances, and I'm going to tell you why. And then I'm a little bit more tempered in my enthusiasm in terms of its being a clinical advance. And I think that that's where it's almost like a stimulus for our research, the advance that we've had. So I'll start by telling folks what lecanemab or Leqembi does. So one of the main drivers of Alzheimer's disease, as most of us know, is amyloid plaques. So we talk about the amyloid plaques of Alzheimer's disease and the tau tangles of amyloid disease. And amyloid is the sine qua non of Alzheimer's disease. If there's not amyloid, it's not Alzheimer's disease. And there's been a tremendous amount of work trying to attack amyloid. And what Leqembi does, it's an infusion that you get through an intravenous, and it actually binds to some forms of amyloid and essentially mops the amyloid up so that it can't aggregate into the plaques, it can't cause inflammation to the plaques, and hopefully it's going to stop the neurodegeneration of Alzheimer's disease. And what this study that it was just published in the New England Journal of Medicine showed was that lecanemab is extremely effective at lowering amyloid in the brain. This is a graph, and I promise I don't have too many graphs here in my talk, but this is a graph showing the comparison between the placebo group in the clinical trial and the people that received the active lecanemab over the course of 18 months. And they measured amyloid in the brain with PET scans. And you can see here an amyloid PET scan of someone with Alzheimer's disease where the whole brain is lighting up with amyloid compared to a normal person. And what was found with lecanemab, and this was also found with the earlier medicine that people might have heard of, aducanumab or Aduhelm from Biogen, was that both of these medicines were extremely effective at lowering the amount of amyloid in the brain, to the point that many people looked normal. It was eliminating almost all the amyloid in people's brains. Now that was great. We've it's great to see that the medicine is actually moving something in the brain and eliminating one of the major pathologies of the brain. But what was critically important, and this is where I say this is where the huge scientific advance was, is that not only did it get rid of this protein in the brain, but it also changed the course of Alzheimer's disease. And so that people on this clinical dementia rating scale, that it clearly and I think compellingly slowed down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. It made a clinical difference. And this was, I've been waiting in my career 30 something years to see data like this around amyloid. So this is a huge scientific advance that we can eliminate amyloid from the brain and make a difference in people's lives. And this is a long and hard-fought battle to get here. So this is a little timeline of Alzheimer's disease and where we are now with some of the treatments that we have, this lecanemab, the aducanumab, and what we'll probably be hearing about very soon, donanemab. And so, Alzheimer first described Alzheimer's disease and these plaques in 1906. It wasn't until 1985 that we knew that these plaques were made of amyloid. And then, you've got research after research after research study, developing biomarkers so that we can actually see amyloid, that we can use those biomarkers to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. We've got other trials that are trying to attack Alzheimer's disease. But really, from the time this research started in the early 2000s, it is now 20 years and billions of dollars that we now have, that I find the evidence compelling that if you change amyloid, you actually can modify the course of the disease. This is a huge scientific advance. And so, we've all been involved in this at the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center between Mass General and Brigham and our collaborators, where we are looking for the causes of Alzheimer's disease, like amyloid or tau. We're looking for the contributors. What are the things that make the disease worse? How do we diagnose the disease? How do we predict who's going to have a fast progression and get worse quickly and who's going to be more slowly? And how do we put all of that towards treatment for prevention and cure? And as we're doing that, how do we actually improve the care of people who are living with Alzheimer's disease? So these are the major types of research going on. And I'm going to focus on some of the two things that I've been most involved in and my program works on, which has to do with diagnosis and to some extent the prognosis, and then the major effort towards treatment to prevent and cure. So I mentioned the importance of diagnosis. Now, remember I said that, this lecanemab attacks amyloid. It doesn't do anything else in the brain. It just attacks amyloid. And so if you're going to give this medicine, which can have some serious side effects, you better be pretty sure that what you have is Alzheimer's disease in the brain and that there is amyloid. And we used to say that the only way that you can be 100% sure that that someone has Alzheimer's disease is if you look at their brain under a microscope after they die, where you can say, is it Alzheimer's, is it Parkinson's or Lewy body disease, is it strokes, or is it something else like frontotemporal dementias? But much of the research over the last 20 years and 25 years has been focused on biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. And we now have a lot of biomarkers. And a biomarker is some test that we can do, a spinal fluid test, an X-ray test, a blood test, an EEG test that tells us what's happening biologically in the brain. So we've got a number of these biomarkers. Amyloid PET scan, I showed you that picture of amyloid PET in the lecanemab study. Again, huge advance. We have several different PET scan tests that can show amyloid in the brain. We don't need someone's brain tissue after they die. We can see it during life. Huge advance in terms of our ability to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. We have other types of PET scans that can show the tau tangles. And the interesting thing about tau tangles is that the amount of tau tangles in your brain correlates with the severity of the disease or the severity of the dementia. And tau, we have tau tangles that we can actually see developing in brain over time that is highly correlated with the severity of the disease. We do spinal fluid testing. This is a very simple and common procedure in neurology. Usually you do it in the office. It takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If anyone in the audience, if giving birth had an epidural, it's very much the same kind of thing as an epidural that women get in labor. And you collect some of this spinal fluid that, bathes the brain and goes up and down the back. And with that, we can bring it to the lab and measure the amount of amyloid, the amount of tau, the amount of many other things. And it really has been a hugely helpful in establishing that someone indeed has Alzheimer's disease. Because I want to say, without these biomarkers, even in the most experienced neurologists' hands, they're only right 70 or 80% of the time. And if you're going to commit someone to a course of an expensive therapy that has a lot of side effects or possible side effects, you have to be sure of what's in their brain. And that's where these biomarkers now become so critical that we have that we have an anti-amyloid treatment. It was one thing when we only had things like Aricept or memantine, because those are, they have minimal, they're very safe, they're very well tolerated, they actually help people with other things other than Alzheimer's disease. But when you've got a medicine like lecanemab that only treats Alzheimer's disease and is a powerful medicine and has side effects, you need to be sure. So the biggest advance that's coming from our research is that we're now moving into an era where we can actually have blood tests to measure amyloid and tau in the brain. And so, we now there have been real advances in microfluidic technologies and the sensitivity of lab tests to detect very, very small amounts of tau or amyloid that leak out into the blood from the spinal fluid. So with these new technologies and the research that we've done, we now are able to kind of measure the amount of tau. And this is showing 90% accuracy for whether someone, 90+% accuracy for whether someone has Alzheimer's disease or not. And these, so some of these tests, like spinal fluid tests, these are now widely available, clinically available. I order them in the lab. I order them in my clinic. And And this is an example of a test report that I get back after I've seen a patient, showing the level of amyloid, the level of tau, and then they graph it for you, and then they say the interpretation is that this person has Alzheimer's disease. And these biomarkers have been, the hugest. I think the importance of diagnosis cannot be understated, and our ability to measure Alzheimer's disease in the brain in living people, the importance of that cannot be overstated, because that is what is enabling us to discover the treatments and determine whether they actually work or not. So I want to come back to lecanemab a little bit, because there's a few points that are important. I said that this is a huge scientific advance, because we can lower amyloid in the brain and we can impact the dementia that people are getting, and we can actually change the course. But what I feel that this is still only a modest clinical advance. If you look at the curves here between the people who received placebo here in blue and how they're going down, over 18 months in terms of their dementia rating scale, and then you see the rate at which the people that receive the active medicine are going down. There's a difference, a highly significant difference. But what bugs me is that it doesn't stop. Here, we're eliminating the amyloid from the brain. We're not changing the amount of amyloid in the brain in the people, but still both groups are declining. And so what this tells me is that we can eliminate amyloid almost to nothing in the brain, and yet people are still getting worse. Not as fast, but they're still getting worse. And that kind of supports the notion that we've had that Alzheimer's disease is more than just amyloid. There are more things that are going on in the brain. And so a lot of the research that we have in the biomarker world is to see what other changes in the brain there are. How much inflammation is there in the brain? How much metabolic abnormalities are there in the brain? How much vascular disease is there in the brain? And, I think many of us think that there's not going to be one pill that cures Alzheimer's disease. It's probably going to, like cancer or like heart failure, it's probably going to take a few medicines from different angles to really stop the disease. And that is why I'm saying that, we've had a tremendous success with lecanemab, but it's not enough. And it's an argument for why we need to move even faster to see how we can help lecanemab help us prevent or treat Alzheimer's disease. So I want to just show you some photos now of what it's like to participate in a research study, and what it feels like. So we do, my program is based in the Charlestown Navy Yard campus of Mass General Hospital. This is actually the building that we have here, Building 149. It used to be a munitions factory for the Navy way back. And Mass General bought it, totally gutted it, and now it's, there are hundreds and hundreds of researchers working there. Not everyone on Alzheimer's disease, but quite a number of us. And one of the things that we had this year that was just a delight, and actually the reason why I moved up to Mass General 7 years ago from Philadelphia, was to start a new clinical translational research unit. And so we had our ribbon cutting finally after 7 years of planning and construction. So, you know, and this is a collaborative venture between the departments of neurology, the departments of psychiatry, the department of radiology. So we have, you know, Merit Sudkovich, our chair of neurology, Maurizio Fava, chair of psychiatry. Back here, Merit's arm is in the way, Jim Brinkman, Jim Brink of radiology, Brad Hyman, who's the head of our Alzheimer's Center, Jill Goldstein, who does women's studies in psychiatry, John Chen in radiology. And we opened up this beautiful new clinical unit. So for the research, the people that are participating in the research that we have here, this is some of just the environment that we have. We have a nice reception area, waiting area, very clean looking hallways, you know, and exam rooms, a little kitchen area, laboratory. And we do, you know, these are some of the folks that are coordinators who are posing in the rooms. So we do neurologic examinations, some cognitive testing. We actually have one room where we do virtual reality tests for people that are in clinical trials. Again, more laboratory work. And then one of the nice things about this clinical unit is that it's one floor above all the fancy PET scans and MRI scanners and magnetoencephalography that the Martino Center in radiology has. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for participating in research, where we can do everything from, you know, some memory and thinking tests in a comfortable surroundings to these fancy scans that we have. And just a shout out to our colleagues over at Brigham. You know, they have a very similar, very nice setup in the Center for Alzheimer Research and Treatment there. So we work kind of hand in hand with the folks at CART across the health system. In our program, we've got a number of current clinical research studies going on. We're doing a number of, we have several, you know, again, remember I said that Alzheimer's is more than amyloid. It's more than tau. It involves other things. So we have both pharmaceutical company sponsored research. We have some of our own research where we're taking dietary supplements to see how that they can help with brain metabolism. We're using tuberculosis vaccines that have been around for 100 years because it looks like they may be helpful at preventing Alzheimer's disease. And we're doing this research. We have some studies where we're trying to improve the biomarkers, do the blood tests, do the spinal fluid tests. How can we improve those biomarkers? And a lot of what we're doing is really kind of moving towards our goal, which ultimately is to have a personalized medicine research program. Because your Alzheimer's disease is different from my Alzheimer's disease. We know this. How is it that we can use these biomarkers to match the right person with the right treatment or combination of treatments? And how can we actually follow them over a period of time to know that the medicine is not working in an average of 1,000 people, but it's working in you? And so that's what a lot of our research over at is kind of oriented towards now. So we do things like spinal taps. This is actually, and Michael will probably comment on this. We actually produced a little video to try to demystify, you know, what spinal fluid research is. This is actually me getting volunteering for research. This is our nurse practitioner, Allison McManus. I just had a spinal fluid test, and my back was sore a little bit for the rest of the day, but that was about it for me. And so we actually produced this video that I hope you can watch to just get a feel for what participating in some of these studies are doing. And the video shows how we, what happens to the spinal fluid. Okay, I just did this test for you. What happens? So we take it, Kate Lacasse will take it to the lab. We'll store some so that we can distribute it to other researchers that are doing Alzheimer's disease research. We spin it down, we do these, fancy robotic tests. We ultimately get a number, which is what we can analyze for the data. But I want to say not all of our research is with spinal taps and MRI scans and things like that. We are also trying to come up with better ways to measure how can we measure how people think, even at home. So one of the other studies that we're doing, we're giving people an iPad with some games on it, so a Boggle type game, a block drop Tetris type game, a solitaire game. And we're asking people to play. And what we're finding is that when we do this, they really like this. Now, no one likes remembering lists of words, and then, or doing these complicated tests that we do in standard neuropsych testing. We're trying to say, okay, go home and play these games that test your brain, that are fun, that many people are doing anyway. And can we learn how you are thinking? And is your thinking, is your ability to do a Boggle game or a memory match game changing over time? Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? If you're getting worse, why? Are you developing a worse stage of Alzheimer's disease? If we give you a medicine, will it improve your memory and thinking? Can we see that on these simple games that we're doing? So I'm trying to give you a feel for the breadth of research and why it's so important, and how is it that we're using all of this data, and why is it important? So this actually is a picture of us before COVID. We're now about twice this size, but I want to just thank you for letting me kind of talk about how important and how excited we are about the work we're doing, and how appreciative we are of the people that participate in our research and help us. So I'll stop at that point. So, Mike, would you like to say a few words now, or you're on mute, Mike?
Sorry, I just saw that. Thank you, Dr. Arnold. I'll be honest with you, listening to you talk and everything, I felt like I wanted to run around the room and go, like in the movie Home Alone when he slaps his face with aftershave for the first time and it hurts, and he goes, ah! But just out of excitement. That was a really great presentation, and it makes me truly excited. Because for me, all I kept thinking about was it showed the importance of people getting involved, and without participants, you're not going to be able to find out any of the work that you are able to do. There's no way you would have people would have found these, even biomarkers, what the biomarkers do, what the PET scans do, the fact that you can actually see things live now, without having to worry about seeing them post-mortem. And, you know, from my perspective, you know, wanting to get involved with research a number of years ago, you know, started with a good friend of mine, Steve Johansson, who was a dear friend who I met at a support group who had Alzheimer's, who has sadly since passed away, but he was involved in trials and just talked about how it's not about him. It was always about the big picture. And that just, you know, really struck home with me. And it made me feel like, because, you know, going back a little bit, you know, when I first got the diagnosis and even a few years afterwards, you feel helpless, like you're not in control. You have no say-so as to what's happening. And at least this gave me a sense of a little bit of giving me back that control, like I was still able to do something about it. And being able to participate and meet folks like you, especially when we did that CF's video, but to see your passion and your excitement, and to meet other researchers and their passion and excitement, and everybody in the centers, it's incredible. It's just incredible. I mean, you know, the old saying, you know, if you love what you do, you're not really working. And I can, every time I walk into that center, I see people's faces, and it just, you can tell they love what they're doing, because they're doing it, you know, because they want to make a difference. And being a research participant, we can be that little piece of the puzzle to help along with that, so we can have that same excitement as well. And I mean, I'm thrilled and excited for the future. I've been involved in a few studies. We're hoping to kick off stage 3 of a trial that I was involved in earlier with Lewy body this year, with Dr. Gompertz, and I'm just, I don't know, I just can't say enough about it. The care that you get from everybody at the centers, from the first person you speak to on the phone to the person that you meet, you just feel welcome, warmed, and included. And for me, that was the most important thing. I really felt like I was included, that I was actually part of the team. I wasn't just a little mouse running through a maze trying to find a piece of cheese. I really felt like I was part of the team. And so if I could encourage anybody who's on the call, who has been thinking about it, about getting involved, please do so. And anybody can get involved. They even have trials, if I'm right, Dr. Arnold, for people who don't have Alzheimer's. So anybody can get involved in research. And yeah, I think I'll end it there, so we can hopefully leave room for any questions that people might have that you can answer. But thank you again for such a wonderful, exciting presentation. I'll still run around the room afterwards and go, ah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And it you know, I think, as you said it, you know, we do view this, it's a partnership. We can't, you know, we need to share the kind of mission and the drive to overcome this disease. And you know, that's how we approach it. And we learn, you know, so much from the people participating, including how to improve our trials and improve our research. So all I can say is thank you.